This night, we dive into an age when eating well wasn't a daily ritual, and there was no such thing as calling in an order for something hot and greasy to arrive at your door. Back then, a truly satisfying meal could be a rare miracle, a few times a year if you were lucky, or not at all for years. And maybe you're wondering, what did eating well even mean? For a tiny circle of the privileged, it meant dining like kings, every day, and even more lavishly on feast days. But for most, delicious might be nothing more than a gnawed bone, stripped of most of its meat, tossed down from the Lord's table. Tonight you'll hear more truths like this. But beyond the facts, you'll be there, stepping into the noise, the smells, and the chaos of a single medieval feast day, and living it for yourself. You've arrived early enough to see the hall before it begins to breathe. The stone walls are already shimmering in the light of 100, maybe 200 candles, their flames twitching in a nervous little dance as though they, too, know the Lord is coming. The air smells of wax and something richer, meat, perhaps, drifting from a door you're not supposed to notice. At the high table, silver goblets stand in neat formation, catching the light so sharply you could probably shave in their reflection. Lower down the rows, the goblets turn to pewter, and then to humble clay mugs still damp from a quick rinse. And beyond the walls, in the wet courtyard, there's a different crowd entirely, peasants pressing against the cold stone, trying to catch a glimpse through arrow slits, waiting for the moment when scraps will be tossed out like blessings to the faithful. The hall is dressed for power. Orange fruits, real oranges, from so far away they may as well have grown on the moon, sit proudly on the Lord's table. You can smell their brightness from here, sharp and sweet against the musk of the room. Each one is worth what a farmer might earn in a year, and they've been arranged in a way that says, you couldn't possibly touch these without permission, and even then, no. Somewhere near the side door, a merchant from town smooths his tunic for the 15th time. He's sold an entire week's worth of grain to buy a gift that might get him inside tonight, though he knows he'll be placed far down the table, where the meat arrives already thin and the wine already tired. Still, better a seat at the edge than standing out in the mud with the ones hoping for bones. The rafters hum with quiet preparation. Servants move like shadows, adjusting plates, readying bunches of herbs to the beams so the air will smell of rosemary instead of sweat. The floor has been swept, though the flagstones still remember the boots that crossed them earlier in the day, muddy, spurred, impatient. There's a tension to the waiting, a kind that makes every cough seem louder. The Lord isn't here yet, but His presence already is, tucked into the careful arrangements and the way people stand straighter when they hear footsteps in the corridor. You can feel the room drawing in its breath, ready to exhale in laughter, music, and the clatter of knives on bone. Outside, a child on tiptoe tries to peer through a crack in the door. His mother pulls him back, muttering that eyes alone can make a man hungry. Inside, a knight leans toward a companion and murmurs something about the scent of roasting pork. The companion glances toward the kitchen and swallows in a way that tells you he's already imagining the first bite. And you, well, you're in a rare position. You get to see it before the music starts, before the noise swallows the details. You get to notice the way the silver waits for the powerful, the clay waits for the modest, and the empty hands wait in the dark. And just when you think the room might burst with anticipation, a door at the far end opens with a slow, deliberate creak. The servants straighten. Somewhere, a horn blows. And you can't help but think, whatever comes through that door first, it's going to set the tone for the whole night. The first sound you hear is the scrape of boots against stone, slow and heavy. Then the smell arrives, thick, rich, smoky, the kind of smell that makes people's posture change without them realizing it. Two men in matching liveries appear in the doorway, carrying a great wooden platter between them. Upon it lies a beast the size of a bench, golden skin glistening, an apple as red as sin wedged between its teeth. The boar is more than food, it's a declaration. Its flanks shine with the careful brushing of honeyed glaze, and the crackle of the skin is so sharp it seems to have its own sound. A thin thread of steam curls from where the knife will soon bite. The apple isn't just garnish, it's a small, cruel joke. Red, perfect, and untouchable. Everyone knows that by the time it's removed, it will have soaked up the juices and become something so rich only the Lord's teeth will know it. At the high table, the Lord gestures lazily for the carving to begin. The knife glides into the tenderest cuts, haunch, loin, shoulder, and generous slices are laid on silver plates. These are passed to the noble guests, whose rings flash as they spear the first pieces. Lower down the hall, the boar travels in smaller and smaller parcels. A rib here, a scrap of crackling there, until what's left is bone and skin. By the time it reaches the servants' corner, it is a story more than a meal. In the courtyard outside, the smell drifts through the cracks in the shutters. The crowd shifts, noses lifting in unison. They know that soon the scraps will come, a heap of chewed bones, maybe with a shred of meat clinging stubbornly to it. For them, it's still worth the wait. The taste of a Lord's feast, even in remnants, is a kind of victory. Far away from the glow of the hall, in a village cottage, another sort of feast is underway. A pot hangs over the fire, bubbling quietly. Inside, cabbage softens alongside a couple of pork bones bought cheap from the butcher, bones so bare you'd think them useless, unless you know the trick of coaxing flavor from them. The family eats from wooden bowls, each sip a careful celebration. Tonight, they are not thinking of the castle. Tonight, they have meat in their broth, and that is reason enough to smile. Back in the hall, the boar's head is set aside, apple still in place, eyes glazed and fixed as though the feast has merely paused for it. The Lord raises his goblet. Conversation swells again, but every so often, a guest glances toward the platter, weighing whether another slice might still be theirs before the next course arrives. And judging by the low murmur from the kitchen, what's coming next might be even stranger. The lull between courses is short, just enough time for servants to clear bones and refill goblets. Then a ripple moves down the hall, not unlike the shiver of a cat before it pounces. From the kitchen door emerges a sight both ridiculous and magnificent. A pie so large it takes 4 men to carry it, their arms trembling as though the thing might be filled with gold. The crust is glazed to a deep, burnished brown, decorated with twists of pastry shaped like vines and leaves. It is set on the Lord's table with exaggerated care. The steward, a man who has perfected the art of ceremony, draws a small knife and slices into the crust. For a heartbeat, nothing happens, then the pie trembles. A sound rises from within, high and frantic. The crust parts further, and suddenly a flurry of tiny wings bursts into the hall. Sparrows, real, living sparrows, whirl upward in a storm of feathers and confusion, their chirping bouncing off the stone walls. The hall erupts in laughter, applause, the clink of goblets against the table. Noble guests crane their necks, trying to catch a glimpse of the birds as they swoop toward the rafters. One lady laughs so hard her jeweled headdress tilts dangerously. The joke is as much about extravagance as it is about surprise. A week's wages for a craftsman could vanish in the flour and sugar of that crust alone, never mind the cost of capturing, keeping, and seasoning the birds for their grand release. Down the table, in the realm of pewter mugs and careful smiles, the reaction is more restrained. The middle ranks clap politely, but their eyes follow the crumbs scattered on the platter. They know that when the crust is cut away, there will be meat inside, rich, spiced meat, and not much of it will make it this far. Still, it is a story worth retelling. We dine on the singing pie. And in the city, just a few streets away, another pie emerges from another oven. It is small, the crust uneven, patched where the dough tore. A few dried berries, saved for weeks, hide in its center. When it is cut, they tumble into the steam, staining it sweet. The children shriek with delight, not because the pie sings, but because it is theirs, and because such a treat will not happen again until the next feast day. Back in the hall, servants begin to portion out the pie's filling. The sparrows, having claimed the rafters as their new kingdom, rain down tiny feathers onto the heads of the guests. A knight plucks one from his goblet and drinks anyway. The lord, watching the birds circle, smiles in a way that suggests the night's successes are far from over. By the time the castle's laughter swells to its full height, there's another kind of feast unfolding in a quieter part of town. No trumpets, no sparrows bursting from pastry, no lords with jeweled fingers tapping on silver goblets. Here, the celebration hides behind shuttered windows, where the light leaks out in thin golden lines, and the smell of roasting goose sneaks down the lane like gossip. Inside, the table wears its best clothes, a white linen cloth carefully pressed, though it bears the ghosts of repairs. Patches sewn with patience and pride. Plates that match, mostly. Cutlery polished so well you can see the candle flames bend in it. In the center of it all, the goose sits proudly, skin crisp to the color of late autumn leaves, the fat pooling beneath in a dish meant to be mopped up with bread. The host, a tailor whose hands are more used to silk than feathers, leans back in his chair and tries to look like this is nothing unusual. But you can see it in his eyes, the quick glances toward the window, the half-smile when he hears footsteps slow outside. He knows the neighbors are curious. Some, he's sure, will mutter about wastefulness. Others will envy the smell. All of them will remember. The goose cost more than it should have. He'd bargained hard with a farmer, then harder still with himself, deciding that this once, he could afford to be the man who serves something grand. In a town where the castle's feast is as much a show of wealth as it is of appetite, such gestures mean something. The tailor may never set foot inside those stone walls, but tonight, with the candles lit and the goose steaming, he's closer than usual. His wife pours ale into cups, each one a little different, one earthenware, one pewter, one that still bears the faint glaze pattern from when it was part of her dowry. The children wait with a mix of patience and restless kicks under the table. Outside, a cart rattles past, carrying someone home from the castle kitchens, perhaps with a small bundle under their cloak, a bone or two to boil for their own supper. The goose is carved carefully, each slice balanced between generosity and self-preservation. The choicest meat goes to the eldest guests, the crisp skin shared evenly, the darker leg meat portioned for those who claim to prefer it. The plate in the center is never empty. Scraps are returned to it so it always looks abundant. It's not just about eating, it's about being seen, even if only by those already in the room. Being able to say, when the festival comes again, "Last year, we had goose." It's about proving, for an evening, that they are not so far from the world of the castle feast. Beyond the shutters, the city breathes in its winter way. Somewhere, in the square, a piper plays for coins. Somewhere else, the castle's music drifts down to the street, muffled by stone. And in the small dining room, with its patched cloth and mismatched cups, the tailor lifts his cup and nods to his guests as if they are nobles, and for tonight, no one corrects him. Still, there's an edge to the joy, an awareness that tomorrow the goose will be gone, the cloth folded away, and the talk in the lane will shift to other things. But for now, the candles keep burning, the fat keeps its slow shimmer, and the sound of knives against plates is its own quiet music. And just beyond this warm little scene, in a colder hall lit by too many candles, something even rarer than goose is being carried in, a dish so untouchable that even the middle ranks can only dream of it. The first thing you notice is the stillness. The chatter in the castle hall fades as though someone has drawn an invisible curtain across the air. Then the sound begins. Not music, not footsteps, but the faint chime of metal against metal, a soft ring with every sway of the platter. It enters slowly, almost reverently. 2 servants carry it, their faces fixed in masks of careful detachment, as though to look too proud, or too hungry, might be dangerous. Upon the great silver tray lies the swan, roasted to a rich, dark sheen, its neck arched in an elegant curve as if frozen mid-glide. Around it, gilded feathers have been artfully reattached to the body, shimmering in the candlelight. And there, at the base of its slender throat, a golden chain glints, pure decoration, pure provocation. The scent is different from the boar or the goose. It's lighter, almost perfumed, mingling with the resinous smoke of the hall's braziers. Swan meat is not something for everyday appetites. It's the kind of luxury that speaks in quiet insults to anyone who cannot have it. Even the nobles lean in closer to watch the carving, their laughter dropping into murmurs. The lord's knife hovers, then slices cleanly into the breast. The flesh beneath is pale and tender, glistening with the juices of its long roasting. Plates are served first to the highest in rank, as is custom. A morsel here, a sliver there. This is not a dish for gorging, it's for tasting, for remembering, for telling others I had swan. The chain remains in place as if to remind the diners that some pleasures come bound in wealth. Lower down the hall, the swan might as well be a story told in another language. The middle tables watch, smiling politely, sipping their wine to hide the curiosity, or the resentment. They won't taste this bird tonight. They may never taste it at all. But they will talk about it tomorrow, adding color and detail until the tale of the swan in gold becomes something half imagined. Back in the hall, the swan's bones are set aside, the golden chain coiled neatly by the steward. The music starts again, a harp this time, plucking notes as delicate as the bird's neck once was. Goblets are raised. But farther down the long tables, past the shimmer of silver and gold, the scene changes. Here, there are no ornate platters, only thick rounds of bread, already soaking up the juices from whatever cuts have reached this far. The edges are dark with gravy, the center soft and heavy, a plate you can eat when the feast is done. The bread beneath your meat is not there for decoration. It is thick, heavy, and baked to last, cut from loaves so dense they could survive a journey on horseback without crumbling. It sits in front of you like a silent companion, square or round, with the crust hard enough to hold a generous cut of roast without folding. Already, it has begun to drink in the feast, the sharp bite of spiced gravy, the sweet drippings from roasted carrots, the salted fat from a slab of mutton. You tear at your meat, the knife scraping the wooden table beneath the trencher's weight, and you can feel the bread softening underneath. This is no fresh morning loaf. It is yesterday's bread, perhaps the day before that, chosen precisely so it will not collapse into soggy ruin after the first pour of sauce. It is a plate, a sponge, and the last course all in one. Across the hall, where silver platters gleam and swans wear gold chains, no one is eating from bread. They have trenchers of pewter or wood, sometimes even glazed ceramic, and their tablecloths remain clean save for a few drops of wine. But here, the bread bears the evidence of the evening. A streak of mustard where the knife rested too long, a patch of soft pulp where the marrow from a bone has seeped in. By the end of the meal, it will be almost unrecognizable, heavy with the flavor of everything you couldn't quite scrape up. When the feast is over, you will not throw it away. You will eat it, as will most of your neighbors at this table, soaking up the last of the wine in it or tearing it into chunks for the stew pot tomorrow. But not every trencher meets this fate. Some will be gathered by servants, carried through the back doors to the kitchen. There, a few are sliced into portions for the castle's staff, the cooks, the stable hands, the boys who fetched water for the soup but never tasted the soup itself. The bread, darkened with the memory of the feast, will be their share of the celebration. In other places, this would be unthinkable. Far to the south, in the bright courtyards of Moorish Spain, the wealthier townsfolk eat from glazed bowls, cool to the touch and painted with looping patterns. Bread is for eating, not for holding food. The sauces there are ladled into dishes, the meats served separately. A trencher would be seen as a crude thing, fit only for the poorest. And for those who are not free, the slaves working in kitchens or tending the orchards, there is no bowl, no trencher at all. Food is handed to them directly, placed on the palm or onto a square of cloth, eaten quickly before it cools. Here in the castle, though, your bread plate is both privilege and practicality. It saves the steward from scrubbing wood, spares the laundress another stained cloth, and ensures that no drop of rich sauce goes to waste. As the hall hums with the noise of chewing and drinking, the trenchers slowly darken, each one telling the story of what it held: goose or lamb, fish or beef, thick gravy or thin. By the time the musicians pause and the torches burn low, the bread beneath your food is warm all the way through, carrying in its crust the ghost of the feast. You lift it, heavy now, and feel the give of the softened crumb beneath your fingers. One bite and all the courses blend into a single taste, the feast distilled, rich and faintly sweet. Somewhere in the kitchen, a stack of untouched trenchers waits for the night to end, destined for the hands of those who have worked since dawn. The bread will be cold by then, but the flavor will still be there, a quiet echo of the hall's splendor, eaten in the shadow of its walls. The swan, the goose, the gilded platters, all of it vanishes when the calendar says you must eat no meat. But in the castle hall, fasting doesn't mean going hungry. It simply shifts the color of the feast. Tonight the long table gleams with silver trays of pike, their skins scored and roasted until it curls back from the white flesh. There are eels coiled like question marks in deep ceramic bowls, slick with herbs and oil. Bowls of mussels sit open, their shells catching the candlelight like small black mirrors. You watch the servants pour steaming broth over a platter of crayfish, their shells bright as lacquered wood. The scent rises in clouds, briny, rich, touched with a sharpness that makes your nose twitch. Somewhere near the lord's end of the table, oysters are piled on a bed of wet seaweed, each shell holding a cold mouthful of salt and cream. The lord himself spears one with the tip of a knife and tips it into his mouth as if it were no more remarkable than bread. For the nobility, fasting is not about deprivation. It is about showing that even without meat, they can summon the sea to their table. The platters arrive in a slow, deliberate order, first the delicate fish, then the heavier ones, then the crustaceans, each course designed to fill without making you feel you've broken the rules. Here in the middle of the hall, the fare is plainer but still far from humble. Your trencher tonight bears a whole grilled perch, its eyes clouded, its spine crisp from the fire. Beside it sits a small cup of green sauce, sharp with parsley and vinegar. You break off a piece of bread and drag it through, catching the oil and flakes together in one bite. But outside these walls, in the fields and villages, the fasting feast looks very different. In a modest timber-framed house, the evening's pride sits on a wooden board, a single fried cod, the skin blistered and curling from the pan. Around it, slices of coarse bread are laid out for dipping into the fish's juices. It is the only dish on the table tonight that carries the scent of the sea. The rest is beans, cabbage, and ale. Still, the cod is treated with care. It is flaked gently, portioned evenly, and eaten slowly, as if stretching it will make it taste richer. Back in the castle, the feast rolls on. The pike's bones are picked clean, the oyster shells tossed into a wooden tub, the broth from the crayfish soaking into the last of the trenchers. The hall smells like a harbor, salt and brine, with a faint sweetness from the roasted fish skins. Somewhere, a servant wipes his hands on his apron and hurries toward the kitchen, where another tray waits to be carried in. Fasting may have changed the menu, but it hasn't dulled the appetite. The silver still gleams, the wine still flows, and the sea, for tonight, belongs entirely to the land. The last of the crayfish shells are swept away, and with them goes the briny fog of the sea. In its place comes something warmer, heavier, a sweetness that seems to drift in before the dishes even appear. You smell it before you see it, almonds roasting in honey, the faint tickle of cinnamon that pricks at the back of your throat. In the castle's great hall, the change in mood is immediate. Conversation softens, the laughter loosens, as if the air itself has grown richer. Platters are carried in with the slow reverence usually reserved for relics. On them lie almond biscuits, each one dusted with a veil of sugar so fine it clings to the fingertips. They are small enough to disappear in 2 bites, and costly enough to buy a week's labor from a good blacksmith. Next come bowls of candied orange peel, their color deep as autumn leaves, glistening under the candlelight. A silver dish of preserved figs is set before the Lord, the syrup dark and glossy. He lifts one with a 2-pronged fork and bites into it slowly, eyes half closed. At the far end of the table, a lady leans forward to dip her biscuit into warm spiced wine, letting it soak until the edges sag. Here, sugar is not a seasoning, it is a performance. The scent of cinnamon alone tells the room that the merchant's ships have returned safely, bringing with them cargo from places most will never see. To taste it is to touch another world, one bite at a time. But far from the castle walls, in a town by the Bosphorus, another sort of sweetness marks the evening's end. In a home of plaster and tile, a family sits cross-legged around a low tray. There is no almond here. It costs more than the family earns in a month, but a small brass pot of date syrup glows in the lamplight. The father pours it into little clay bowls, its dark stream curling like ink. The children tear pieces of flatbread to dip, their fingers coming away sticky, the sweetness clinging under their nails. It is not a feast of gold and silver, but it carries the same pause, the same slow chewing, the same wish for the moment to last. Back in the hall, the biscuits are vanishing faster than the servants can replace them. Fingers gleam with honey, lips shine with syrup. Somewhere near the hearth, a page sneaks an almond, cradling it in his palm as if it might sprout into a tree. The air is thick now, sugar, spice, warm wine, the kind of richness that sits heavy in the chest and behind the eyes. And just when you think the night has had its last indulgence, the steward leans to the Lord's ear and murmurs something that makes him smile. The kitchens, it seems, still have one more prize to bring forth, a prize that smells not of gardens or orchards, but of the deep forests and the hunt. The sweetness fades like the last chord of a song, replaced by the darker scent of wood smoke and roasted meat. You hear it before you see it, the soft hiss of fat meeting flame, the occasional pop of a bone in the heat. Then the doors at the back of the hall swing open, and in comes the hunt. 2 servants carry a great spit between them, the weight of it bowing their shoulders. At one end, a pheasant still wears its tail feathers, fanned out and lacquered for show. At the other, a hare hangs limp, its skin browned and glistening, the legs tucked in close as though still fleeing. The spit is lowered onto iron rests beside the hearth, where a cook with arms like ropes turns it slowly, basting with a ladle of thick, herb-heavy broth. For the Lord's table, this is the truest luxury, not bought in a market, but taken from the land by their own bow or spear. Each slice carved from the pheasant's breast is pale and tender, steam curling from the cut. The hare is darker, leaner, its meat holding the tang of wild grass and cold air. The guests lean forward as the platters make their way down the high table, the smell trailing behind like a promise. In a hall like this, game is as much a story as it is a meal. The Lord recounts the morning's chase between bites, describing the frost on the fields, the way the hound's breath smoked in the air, the sound of antlers breaking branches. The listeners smile, some nodding as though they had been there, others imagining it with every chew. Far to the north, in a coastal Scandinavian village, The same scent of fire and meat hangs in the air, but here the prize is a seal. It lies on a wooden slab, the skin drawn back to reveal the deep red flesh, the fat pale as snow. Men slice it into thick cuts, laying them on flat stones over the fire. The oil crackles, spitting into the flames, and the smoke rolls out to sea. On another stone, strips of reindeer meat dry slowly, to be chewed in the long winter nights ahead. It is not the same feast as in the French hall, but it holds the same pride, a kill earned, shared, and savored. Back in the castle, the platters grow lighter. The hare's ribs are bare now, the pheasant's tail feathers droop in the heat. A servant passes by with a tray of trencher bread soaked through with juices, heading toward the middle tables where the guests will fall silent for a moment, biting down into the mingled taste of meat and bread. The hunt story will fade by morning, replaced by other boasts, but tonight it fills the room, on the tongue, in the air, and in the slow, satisfied sighs that ripple down the benches. And just beyond the edge of the torchlight, another kind of music begins to stir, a sound that has nothing to do with birds or hounds, but will hold the hall's attention all the same. The first notes slip into the hall almost unnoticed, a single string plucked, a low hum like someone tuning their own breath. Then another joins it, and another, until the air between the tables is alive with sound. Minstrels in bright, mismatched clothes weave between the benches, their lutes and fiddles catching glints of candlelight. One begins a tune so quick the fingers blur, and the room turns its head as though following a bird darting through the rafters. Near the hearth, a juggler steps forward, his hands empty at first. Then, as if from nowhere, knives flash in the air, 3, then 4, the steel blinking in the firelight. The guests closest to him lean back, wine sloshing in their goblets. A burst of laughter follows as he flips one behind his back, catching it without a glance. His grin is wide and toothy. He knows the wine has loosened their nerves, and their purses. At the high table, the Lord watches with a smile that is part indulgence, part calculation. Music and spectacle keep guests in their seats, and keep them drinking. Coins are already finding their way into the performers' baskets, the metallic chime almost as rhythmic as the music itself. A young minstrel steps close to a lady's bench, playing a softer air now, one that makes her tilt her head and close her eyes for a few moments longer than polite. Far from this great hall, in a small English village, the night's entertainment looks very different. In the single-room alehouse, one man sits by the fire with a battered fiddle, drawing a tune from strings that have seen more winters than he has teeth. The bow squeaks now and then, but no one minds, they sing along anyway, boots stamping the packed earth floor. There's no juggling here, unless you count the landlord balancing 3 tankards in one hand, weaving between benches without spilling a drop. Back in the castle, the jugglers have moved on to goblets, tossing them in graceful arcs so that the wine inside barely trembles. The minstrels switch from quick jigs to stately marches, filling the room with the sense that the feast has not only been eaten, but celebrated properly. Servants slip between the performers, refilling cups, replacing candles, keeping the hall's hum unbroken. And just as the applause begins to swell, a new scent drifts in from the kitchens, warm, spiced, and rich enough to make even the most entranced guest glance toward the far door. The music doesn't stop, but the hall's attention shifts, drawn toward the promise of a drink that warms more than the hands. The door from the kitchens opens, and with it comes a breath of heat and perfume. It is not the smell of roasting meat or baking bread this time, but something finer, heavier, the kind of scent that clings to the air like a silk curtain. Servants step into the hall in pairs, each holding a great silver jug between them, steam coiling from the spout. Even before a drop is poured, you can taste it just by breathing: cinnamon, sharp and sweet; clove, dark and resinous; the faint sting of ginger. The first cups go to the high table, as always. The lord's goblet catches the light when the hippocras is poured, the wine now deepened to the color of garnets by its long rest with the spices. He lifts it, inhales, and you can almost see his shoulders loosen in approval. Around him, the other nobles murmur, lifting their cups before sipping as if to let the scent have its own moment. Down the length of the hall, the drink moves more slowly, each table leaning forward as the jugs approach. It is hot, hot enough to miss the metal cups, and each swallow carries a weight in more ways than one. Spices like these are not thrown into a pot on a whim. A single stick of cinnamon might have traveled farther than most of the guests ever will. It's cost enough to make a merchant think twice. It's said that the wine in your cup is worth half a month's earnings for a skilled craftsman. A man at the middle table swirls his portion, watching the spices cling to the rim before sliding back into the red. Warms the blood, someone says nearby, a phrase repeated so often it feels like tradition itself. And it does. The heat spreads from the tongue to the chest, down the arms, into the fingers. The kind of warmth that makes you forget how far into winter you are. In a Mediterranean port town hundreds of miles away, the scene is simpler but no less proud. Here, the middle-class families gather on feast days around a jug of wine watered down to stretch between them all. Instead of cinnamon or cloves, the brew is scented with whatever grows nearby. Sprigs of rosemary, a handful of thyme, maybe a leaf of bay. The drink is pale, almost shy in color, but fragrant enough to carry a hint of summer into the cold season. There is no silver goblet, only plain clay cups, but the way they're lifted is the same, as if the first sip marks the beginning of the real celebration. Back in the castle hall, the hippocras works its slow magic. Conversation mellows, voices deepen, and the musicians shift into slower tunes that let the taste linger. Someone laughs too loudly at the far end, and it rolls up the hall like a reminder that the night is not over. A servant refills the lord's goblet before it can touch the table. At the middle benches, men cradle their cups like small fires, careful not to waste a drop. The scent doesn't fade quickly. Even after the last cup has been drained, it hangs in the air, warm, spiced, almost heavy. And just when the guests are certain they have reached the peak of the evening, another door opens, this time not with the curl of steam, but with the sharp, briny smell of something pulled from colder waters. A different delicacy, one that does not warm but wakes. The scent arrives before the servants do, a sharp, briny breath that cuts through the heavy perfume of the spiced wine, as if the sea itself has been invited to the feast. Heads turn toward the side door, where two men in white aprons carry in a great pewter dish, its surface gleaming like frost under the candlelight. The hall quiets, not from reverence, but from curiosity. This is not the golden glow of roasted fowl or the earthy steam of stews. This is cold, glistening, and oddly alive in the light. Upon the dish lies a pattern of pale curls, each piece of eel set in a translucent jelly so clear you can see the herbs suspended within, sprigs of parsley, shreds of dill, a few stubborn peppercorns. The jelly catches the flicker of the torches, shimmering faintly as the dish is set upon the high table. It smells of tide pools and wet stone, with an undercurrent of spice that promises the sea has been tamed, at least for tonight. The lord leans forward, inspecting the centerpiece like a general surveying new territory. A slice is lifted with care, the knife breaking the jelly with a gentle crackle, the eel beneath pale as ivory and twice as smooth. The texture, once tasted, is a shock to the unprepared, cool, firm, almost buttery, with a faint resistance that reminds you this creature once twisted through dark waters. The jelly itself carries the spice and vinegar, bright against the softness of the fish. Nobles murmur to one another, some with delight, others with the polite restraint of those unsure if they enjoy what is expected of them. A lady in a gown the color of winter sky takes a second helping without hesitation, while her neighbor merely lets his portions slide around the plate. more interested in his cup than his fork. Further down the hall, where the air cools and the plates are less ornate, the eel has a different effect. There is no hesitation here. The portions are smaller, and each bite is taken with the quiet satisfaction of those who know this will not be offered again for a long time. Fingers dab at the jelly left behind on the plate, bread pressed to it to claim what little remains. Across the city, in the tangled streets of London's busier quarters, another sort of eel dish marks the holiday. In small, crowded kitchens, the fishmongers have sold their smoked eels early in the morning, and by now the scent of them drifts through narrow lanes. Families of middling means eat them warm from the pan, the skin blistered and crisp, the flesh flaking apart over coarse bread. There is no jelly here, no artful suspension of herbs, but the pride is much the same. To place an eel on the table, even without ceremony, is to say, this day is not like the others. Back in the hall, the high table's dish grows barer, the once perfect spiral now interrupted by gaps where the most generous cuts have been taken. The jelly has begun to soften under the heat of the room, glistening pools forming on the plate's rim. Servants watch closely, ready to whisk it away before it collapses entirely. Presentation, after all, is half the feast. The harpist changes tune, something lighter, as if to lift the brine from the air. Cups are refilled, and the eel, for all its careful preparation, becomes just another memory among the night's indulgences. Yet there's a satisfaction in having had it, a quiet bragging right that will ripple out into tomorrow's conversations. Yes, there were eels, and they were done in the French style, with jelly clear enough to read a letter through. But the kitchens are not finished. Beyond the heavy oak doors, a different scent is stirring, sweet, heavy, and golden. It coils upward from copper pots and sugared trays, drifting toward the hall like a whisper of endings. Not endings of the feast itself, but of its richest courses. Something that will cling to fingers and teeth, and if you are lucky, your memory long after the last crumb is gone. The sweet scent reaches the tables before the servants do, not the cloying heaviness of honey nuts or the deep, warm spice of baked apples, but something brighter. A perfume that doesn't belong to the stone walls of the castle at all. It carries the sharpness of sun-baked groves, the faint salt of sea wind, the whisper of soil that has never known frost. Heads turn toward the doors as if a new kind of guest has arrived. And then they appear, 3 men in the livery of the household, each bearing a silver tray that catches every candle flame. On them, piled like treasure, are fruits that seem almost too vivid for the gray of a northern winter, the burning red of pomegranates, their skins tight with the promise of seeds that will stain fingers like ink, the dusky gold of figs, some already split to reveal their blushing hearts, the glowing yellow of citrus, still glossy with the wax of their long journey. The trays move slowly, not out of ceremony, but because the servants know the value of what they carry. A pomegranate here costs as much as several days of a mason's labor. A single fig might have traveled farther than some of the guests themselves. The Lord smiles faintly as he plucks an orange from the pile, rolling it in his palm as if weighing the worth of the voyage it took to reach him. Knives flash as the fruit is cut. The air blooms with sharpness and sugar. Segments of orange glisten in the lamplight, the juice beating along the edge of a blade. The figs are soft as velvet, their seeds crunching faintly between teeth. The pomegranates spill their garnet jewels into waiting bowls, each one catching the light as if it had been cut from glass. At the high table, these are not eaten in hunger but in curiosity. A bite here, a sip of wine to follow, a half-smile exchanged with a neighbor. The taste is a novelty, a conversation piece. Fingers are wiped clean with linen. Seeds are spat discreetly into cups. The fruit is as much for the eyes as for the tongue. Far away, in a village tucked into the hills of the same Italian lands, the feast has a different shape. On the table, there are fruits too, not from ships, but from storage, thin slices of apple, their edges browned, pears dried to leathery folds. They are sweet in their own way, the concentrated taste of last summer, but they carry no perfume of foreign shores. Here, the excitement is not in the rarity of the fruit, but in the fact that it has lasted this long, that it can be shared before spring comes again. Back in the castle, a lady tips a handful of pomegranate seeds into her cup, watching them sink through the wine like drops of blood. Across the hall, a man laughs as he tries to peel an orange without tearing the skin, a challenge he has set himself after too much wine. A servant slips the discarded peels into a wooden bowl. They will be dried and burned later for their scent. The fruit dwindles. What remains is gathered, the trays retreating toward the kitchens, where the truly rare pieces will be kept for the Lord's private table tomorrow. In their place, the first signs of ending begin to creep into the hall. Refilled cups held just a little longer, glances toward the high table to see if the host will rise. But there is one more gesture before the night leans toward its close, one more moment to bind the evening together. The host himself, standing with a cup in hand, ready to give the words that will carry the feast into memory. The scrape of a chair against stone is enough to hush the hall. It isn't loud, just a single sound in a room where laughter and clinking cups have been echoing for hours, but it carries, as though the walls themselves lean in to listen. At the high table, the Lord rises. His robe shifts like heavy water, deep crimson trimmed in fur, the gold thread catching light with every move. In his hand is a goblet no one else will touch tonight, beaten gold, set with 3 green stones the size of peas. It looks almost too heavy to lift, yet he raises it without effort, holding it so the firelight glances off its curve. For a moment, the room waits, breath balanced on the edge of silence. When he speaks, it isn't in the booming voice of a commander, but in a tone that seems to reach each guest individually. Words of thanks to those who came, praise for the loyalty of his household, a nod to the bounty of the land and the fortune of the season. The speech is short, but each syllable is steeped in ceremony, the pauses as carefully measured as the wine in his cup. The guests mirror him, lifting their own cups, silver, pewter, wood, whatever their station has granted them. The gesture binds the room for an instant, the nobleman and the merchant, the steward and the visiting knight, all looking toward the same raised hand. Wine shifts in the light, catching glints of orange from the flames. The Lord drinks first, as is his right, and the hall follows. The sound is small but constant, the soft pull of wine from cups, the muted set-down of goblets. The taste is rich and layered, the kind of wine that would empty a lesser man's purse in a single night. It warms as it goes down, curling in the chest, coaxing the cheeks to flush. At the far end of the hall, past the last pools of candlelight, a similar gesture is taking place in another kind of home. There is no gold here, no polished silver. A man in a wool tunic, shoulders still broad from work, lifts a wooden mug of ale. His words are simple, a wish for health, for a good year, for enough bread in the cupboard until next winter. The ale is cheap, slightly bitter, but the smile that follows the drink is unguarded and real. His family drinks with him, the mugs mismatched, the light from the hearth soft on their faces. Back in the castle, the Lord's goblet is set down, the green stones winking one last time in the firelight. The moment passes, and sound floods the hall again, chairs scraping, a murmur of conversation, the shuffle of servants clearing plates. Yet that shared pause lingers in the air, the invisible thread that has tied every cup to one man's hand. In the kitchens beyond the hall, other cups are being filled, plain and unadorned, but waiting for their own moment of raising. Because not all toasts are made in gold, and not all words of thanks echo through stone halls. The hall still hums with talk and music, but beyond its arched doorway, in the warmer, narrower air of the kitchens, another gathering is beginning. Here, the light is lower, gold from the hearth and red from the coals, and the smell is thicker: roasted meat, burnt sugar at the edge of a pan, bread gone dark in the crust. The great platters from the Lord's table arrive one by one, carried on tired arms, their once ornate arrangements now loosened, half dismantled. On a side table, the steward sets down a trencher still glistening with fat, a rib bone clinging to a last thread of meat. Someone laughs, not mockery, but hunger's relief, and reaches for it before the steam has faded. A pot of vegetables, their edges softened from hours of heat, is tipped into a wide wooden bowl. Next to it, hunk after hunk of bread, the thick trenchers from the middle tables, lands with a thud, their crusts darkened from soaking up sauce and wine. The servants sit where they can, on benches near the wall, on overturned buckets, on the floor with their backs to the cool stone. Plates are not matched, and some make do with a knife in one hand and bread in the other. The first bites are quick, almost urgent, the kind of eating done by people who have been on their feet since before the sun rose. Conversation comes only after the edge of hunger has been blunted. Then, it's all quick exchanges. Who spilled wine on the Lord's sleeve? Whose trenchers held the most sauce? Who saw the juggler drop a knife? Far away, in the warm dusk of a courtyard in Moorish Spain, another group gathers for their own feast. These are not servants in the same sense. These are slaves, and no platters are brought to them from a lord's table. Instead, a single wide clay bowl is set down, filled with porridge made from barley, sweetened with a few dried dates. The dates are not for decoration, they are the treat. No knives flash, no goblets are raised, and the only music is the scrape of wooden spoons against clay. Back in the castle kitchens, the mood has loosened. Someone passes a jug of ale down the line, another tosses the bone from the trencher into the fire just to hear it hiss. They are not guests, and they are not meant to linger, but for a short while, the air is their own, filled with the sounds of chewing, low laughter, and the steady scrape of bread across the bottom of the serving platters. And if you think this is the end of the feast, you'd be wrong, because just outside, beyond the kitchen doors, there's a crowd waiting for what comes next. The kitchen doors swing open, and a blast of cold night air sweeps through, tugging at the steam rising from the platters. Outside, the dark courtyard has shifted into a different sort of hall, not of stone and candlelight, but of frost and lamplight, with faces pressed forward, eyes fixed on the doorway. They've been waiting here since the music in the great hall began to fade, knowing that once the servants have eaten their fill, the rest will be carried out. Two men appear first, bent under the weight of a wicker basket large enough to hold a child. Inside, thick wedges of bread, some still soft, some already hard as tile, shift with each step. Behind them comes a woman balancing a shallow tub, the gleam of bones visible under the spill of cloth draped over the rim. A child's gasp cuts through the murmuring, and the crowd surges forward, only to be checked by the steward's bark. One by one, the baskets and tubs are set down near the gate. The smell of roasted meat lingers in the cold, sharper now against the damp air. A servant lifts the cloth from the bone tub, and the crowd leans in as though the scent alone might feed them. Fingers reach, some quick, some hesitant, and the first bones vanish, clutched like prizes, the meat clinging in thin strings. A man in a patched coat tucks one into his sleeve, the shape pressing awkwardly against his arm, but he doesn't care. The bread is divided with less ceremony. Whole loaves are rare. Most pieces are hunks from the trenchers, their middles soft from gravy, their edges stiff and curling. Children snatch them with both hands, biting before they've even turned away. A little girl laughs when she finds a shred of onion caught in the crust, as if it's treasure. Somewhere near the back, a boy holds up a chicken leg, no bigger than his palm, and waves it to his mother as though to prove the night was worth standing in the cold. In the far south, on a winter night in an Italian city, the same scene takes a different shape. Here, there is no waiting at the castle gate, because there is no free bread. Instead, the leftovers from the wealthy tables are carried not to the street, but to a market stall, where they are sold for coins so small they're more copper than metal. People still gather, still wait for the moment when the stall-keeper lifts the lid of the basket, but now they have to haggle for a piece of bread that was gnawed by another mouth only hours before. Those with nothing in their pockets drift away, the smell of meat following them down the alley. Back in the French courtyard, the baskets empty quickly. The voices grow louder now, not from anger, but from the sudden ease of chewing. A woman crouches by the gate, feeding pieces of bread to a boy too young to hold them himself. Somewhere, a dog's sharp bark cuts through the laughter, and a scrap of meat changes hands faster than the eye can follow. The steward claps his hands once, a dull crack in the cold air, and the crowd understands. There will be no more tonight. Slowly, they peel away, some tucking their prizes into aprons, others eating as they walk, the night swallowing the sound of their steps. The gate closes with a thud, and the courtyard is empty again, save for the smell that will linger until morning. And inside, in the warmth of the kitchen, the servants have already turned to their next task. The hall is not yet quiet, but it will be soon, and then another sort of stillness will take hold. The last of the goblets have been drained, though a few sit abandoned, circles of wine drying at their feet. Candles gutter and lean, their wax slumped into pale dunes that hug the rims like tired shoulders. The smell has changed. The feast's noise has burned itself down to smoke, tallow, and the wet wool that big rooms collect after a long night. You stand in a pocket of hush and hear the small things, a chair that remembers a weight and size, a plate settling on its neighbor with a porcelain kiss, the soft hiss when a splash of wine finds a puddle of grease on the oak and makes its brief treaty. A feather from the juggler's cap lies in a drip of wax, lacquered into history. 2 pomegranate seeds, garnet stubborn, have rolled under the high table where no broom will think to look until spring. Servants move through the room with the quiet authority of people who know where everything goes after it has been admired. Knives clink into basins. Pewter stacks ensure towers. A girl with red hands lifts a tray of trenchers that have become their own archive of the night, edges stiff with mustard, centers dark with juices, a thumbprint here, a smear of green there. She shifts the weight to her hip and disappears toward the kitchen, leaving a thin road of gravy that will shine until the first bucket slashes. The minstrels pack silence into their cases, strings loosened, bows slid back into cloth sleeves. One man tests a final note under his breath. It is too pure for the empty room, and he winces, as if he has spoken out of turn to a sleeping animal. A juggler retrieves a knife from beneath a bench with 2 fingers and a guilty smile, then tucks it away like a secret he will deny tomorrow. The harp remains, leaning against the wall, a large, delicate rib cage that hums once when the draft finds it. The draft owns the hall now. It explores, pleased with its inheritance, stirring candle smoke into long gray threads that drift toward the roof beams. Somewhere above, a bird that is not supposed to be inside shifts and taps once, a faint reminder of a pie that learned to sing, then to fly. You run a hand along the table's scarred edge. Under the fresh cuts from tonight you can feel older grooves, a library of appetite. Here a knife bit too hard, there a ring branded by a lazy goblet. The wood is sticky where wine found sugar. It is slick where fat learned the grain. If the table were lifted and poured, the room would season itself. At the high end, the lord's chair sits back from the board, a square of floor kept warm for hours by a single pair of boots. A servant kneels with a cloth and a bowl, working carefully around the place where the goblet's base left a clean circle in the spill, as if the wine had remembered its manners. The great hearth is in its thoughtful mood. Logs collapse into their own red geography. Ash drifts and resettles like slow snow. A spit turns half a circle and stops, the hook tapping the iron with a sound like a polite knock. Someone laughs in the kitchen, the kind of laugh that only happens once work has given permission. Far from the high table and its perfumes, another room is closing the same day with different hands. A middle-sized house, the kind with a good latch and a bad stair, breathes out the last of its heat. On the board, a neat procession of plates, none of them fine, all of them clean. A woman folds a cloth and lays it between trencher and trencher, a small armor against damp. Bits of roasted carrot go into a pot, bones into another. The fat from the pan is poured into a clay jar and will be called upon to make tomorrow taste like today. A boy is sent to the cold place with a heel of bread wrapped in linen so the morning porridge will have something to remember. He returns on tiptoe, proud of not having dropped the chill on the floor. A man wipes the knife and sets it on the mantel where it does not belong, and is moved, without words, by a hand that knows where things live. The last cup is drained, not because thirst persists, but because leaving wine in it would be an admission of poor planning. They do not waste. The leftover slice is cut into thinner leftovers. The rind is shaved until rind refuses to be anything but itself. A few sugared almonds, bought dear, counted twice, are tucked in a jar behind the barley where small hands will forget to look. The bench goes under the table, the bucket under the bench. A candle is pinched with spit, and the little thread of smoke draws a straight line toward the beam, as tidy as it counts. Back in the hall, a broom begins its slow argument with the floor. The bristles gather threads of rushes, crusts the size of coins, someone's jet bead, someone's button bone from a hair. The broom knows no hierarchies. It collects from king's elbow and tenant's seat in one democratic sweep. A mouse appears, declares itself temporary steward of a sugared peel, and is overruled by a shoe. Lanterns arrive like decisions. One by one, the high flames are folded down to night's size. Shadows lengthen, then choose corners. The steward takes a last, measuring look. Tables in order, windows latched against the weather that likes to meddle, doors set so the hinge will not complain in the morning, and he is satisfied in the private way of men who prefer their victories to be silent. You listen as the room sheds its voices. It keeps some. Every great space does. A murmur is left behind the hearthstone. A joke, unfinished, clings to the underside of the high table and will be heard again when the boards swell in summer. A promise is stuck in wax somewhere and will be released by a warm palm in another year. The rest goes out with the drafts and joins the town's thin mist, which lives on stories. The door into the night opens, and cold walks in with purpose. The last tray leaves. The latch falls. For a breath the hall has the pure stillness of a held note. Then even that note learns to be furniture. You step into the corridor and find that the stone there has learned quiet too. Outside, the yard is damp and honest, the sky a dark piece of cloth pinned with a pin or two. Somewhere far off, a fiddle warms up on 3 notes, and cannot decide which one it likes best. A cart rolls past the window with a new garland looping from its side rail. In a village that has more sky than roofs, trestles are being carried into a lane, and benches tested by men who know exactly how much laughter they'll have to hold. By the time the banquet hall is emptying its last guests, the narrow lanes of a German village are filling with sound. Not the clear ring of a lute or the polished harmony of trained voices, but the kind of music that comes from boots stamping on hard earth, from wooden benches scraping across the packed dirt to make space for more people, from a dozen different laughs trying to outdo one another. Here, the wedding feast doesn't wait for the sun to set, it's been going since the early afternoon. Long tables are set end to end right on the street, each one made of planks balanced on barrels or crates. The tablecloths are mismatched lengths of linen, some dyed, some bleached, all bearing the marks of many washings. On them sit bowls of cabbage soup, steaming thick with onions and caraway, and platters of pork ribs, browned on the outside, tender inside, the fat still sizzling in spots. Loaves of coarse bread sit between every few guests, meant for tearing and passing down the line. There's cheese too, pale and sharp, cut into wedges that vanish as quickly as they appear. The air smells of wood smoke and roasting meat, and under it, the faint sweetness of spilled ale drying on the ground. Children run between the tables, weaving through skirts and boots, chased off when they linger too close to the platters. The bride's dress is simple but clean, her hair braided with ribbons, and she smiles the whole time, even as she's passed from one dance partner to another. The groom looks both proud and exhausted, pulled into conversations, clapped on the back, handed another mug before he's finished the last. A fiddler sits on a stool near the head of the tables, bowed, dancing over the strings in a rhythm that's more felt than perfectly kept. Beside him, a man with a drum keeps a beat with the heel of his hand, loud enough to carry down the whole row of guests. Every so often, someone stands to sing a verse, half in jest, half in earnest, and the chorus comes back in a roar. Far from here, in the high-ceilinged hall of a noble house in the same region, another wedding is underway. The hall is draped in fabric, banners of family crests hanging between the arches. Tables here groan under the weight of dishes, roasted game birds with feathers reattached for display, tureens of spiced stews, bream and almond sauce. Casks of wine are tapped, filling silver goblets without pause. Minstrels walk the length of the hall, lutes and flutes blending with the low hum of conversation. Back in the village, the food is simpler, the drink less refined, but the joy runs just as deep. Here, no one needs to lower their voice or mind their manners. The dance can spill into the street, the songs can grow rowdy, and when the bride laughs with her head thrown back, it's because she's thinking of nothing but this night. And though the two celebrations will never see each other, the same moon will rise over both before the night is done. By the time the wedding in the village is still stamping out its last dance, the great square of a medieval English town has been burning with firelight for hours. Wooden stalls line the edges, their canopies sagging with smoke from the cooking fires. In the center, long spits turn slowly over open flames, dripping fat into the embers and sending up bursts of sparks. The smell of roasting meat rolls across the crowd like a tide, boar ribs, mutton haunches, and chickens trussed with twine, their skins blistering and crackling as the spit boys crank the handles. The tables here are rough planks on trestles, the kind that can be carried away when the fair ends. They are already crowded with trenchers piled high, flaky pies stuffed with minced meat and onions, wheels of cheese cut into thick wedges, and flagons of ale that sweat in the evening air. Minstrels wander between the rows, playing tunes that have traveled from one coast to another, their verses shifting with every town that sings them. Children dart between the benches with sticky fingers, clutching small hand pies still warm from the ovens. Somewhere near the church steps, a troop of jugglers keeps the crowd circling, knives flashing in the torchlight, apples plucked from the air and bitten mid-spin. The air is thick with shouts from vendors, clinking mugs, and the low thrum of a drum someone has been pounding since midday. It's noisy, chaotic, and unashamedly alive. Here, no one worries about the manners of the high table. The only rule is to eat before the plate's empty. Far away, in an Arab city of the same age, the celebration of a holy day looks and smells entirely different. The streets here are just as crowded, but the air is perfumed with cinnamon, saffron, and the caramel scent of roasting nuts. Platters of sweetmeats are laid out on cloth-covered mats, fried dough drenched in honey, candied dates, pistachio pastries that crumble at the touch. The absence of meat is deliberate. The day is marked by faith, not feasting on flesh. Instead, vendors pour thick, spiced coffee into small cups, passing them from hand to hand as the crowd drifts from one stall to the next. Back in England, the fair will last until the torches burn low and the ale runs out. In the Arab streets, the sweets will vanish before midnight, leaving only the scent of spice lingering in the warm air. And though the flavors could not be more different, both crowds will walk home with the same weight in their stomachs, and the same stories to tell. Far from the clatter of the fair and the echo of music in castle halls, the night in the countryside falls with a softness that eats sound. A single cottage stands at the edge of a field, its windows leaking a dull glow into the dark. Inside, the table is small enough that every chair leg touches another if pushed back. A single candle burns in the center, its light catching in the steam that rises from a clay bowl. The bowl holds a bean stew, thick, brown, and unhurried in its cooking. It has been bubbling in the hearth since midday, the beans soft enough to break against the tongue, their broth heavy with onions and the faint tang of vinegar. Beside it, on a wooden board, lies half a loaf of bread, the crust hard from yesterday's baking. The youngest child fingers the heel, waiting for the moment the father will slice it into portions. There is no hurry here. Each person serves themselves slowly, ladling just enough stew to fill their spoon without spilling. The bread is passed hand to hand, torn rather than cut when the knife proves too blunt. A swallow of well water follows each bite, cool from the bucket drawn at dusk. The only music is the low sound of eating, the scrape of wooden spoons on the inside of bowls, and the wind moving in the thatch overhead. For this family, the feast is not measured in the richness of the food, but in the fact that everyone is seated together, no one away in the fields or at market. The candle will burn until the wick gutters, but no longer. Tallow is not spent carelessly, even on a holiday. When the bowls are empty, the last scraps of bread are tucked away for the morning, and the pot is set near the coals in case anyone wakes hungry before dawn. Miles away, in the same region, a castle has not yet settled into silence. In a side chamber off the great hall, two noblewomen linger over the remains of the feast. A silver platter holds the carcass of a roasted goose, its breast picked nearly clean, its skin gone soft with cooling fat. One lifts the meat with her fingers, the other dips bread into a bowl of sauce studded with prunes. Goblets of wine stand half full, their surface catching the firelight. Laughter drifts in from the hall, where a knot of men are still arguing over a game of dice. Here, the feast is a thing without an end. Servants come and go, replenishing dishes as though the night were bottomless. Leftovers are not guarded for tomorrow, they are offered freely to any guest still awake, or simply abandoned to be cleared at first light. If you stood in the doorway of both places, the cottage and the chamber, you might find the same quiet, the same dim light, the same small group gathered over the remains of a meal. But the difference lies in what happens when the candle dies. In the cottage, sleep will come quickly, pressed under patched blankets, the taste of beans still lingering. In the castle, the night might stretch on, the air thick with wine and the low hum of secrets traded in the hours when the world outside has gone dark. And so the day ends, in hunger sated, in hunger waiting, in warmth shared, in warmth wasted. One roof that can barely hold its own heat, another that has never known the cold. The roads between them will stay empty until morning, but the stories of the day, of swans and trenchers, of fairs and feasts, will travel far faster than any rider. You've made it to a moment where we slow the world down. Not for weeks, not for years, just for one long day. From the first light to the last spark of the fire, you'll walk the streets, hear the voices, and taste the air of a city alive with celebration. No more glancing from afar, this time you're in it. Shoulder to shoulder with lords, merchants, and those who came with nothing but the hope of catching the glow. Stay close. The day has only just begun. The first thing you notice is the sound. Narrow streets pressing in on both sides, timbered walls leaning toward each other like gossiping neighbors, and somewhere ahead, the steady clatter of cartwheels on cobbles. You're in London, June 15th, 1415, the day of the Midsummer Festival of St. John. The air already smells of fresh bread and damp stone, tinged with the faint sweetness of mead warming in the sun. Merchants are already at their posts, their stalls dressed with garlands of green oak and birch, leaves still wet with dew. A butcher wipes his hands on his apron and hangs a side of beef for all to see, not because it's for sale to everyone, but because it draws the right kind of attention. Across the lane, a baker pulls honey cakes from a wood-fired oven, their glazed tops glistening, and the scent wraps around you like a slow invitation to spend coin you don't have. At the upper end of the street, the Guildhall doors are open, and apprentices are hauling out benches and trestle tables for later in the day. The wood is rough and splintered from years of use, but today no one cares, no one will be sitting for long. The festival is about movement, processions, music, the slow migration from the market to the riverbank and back again. A woman with a basket of flowers shouts over the noise, offering posies of marigold and lavender. For luck and love. Though the real luck is if you can get one before the petals wilt in the heat. A cluster of children trail behind her, more interested in the stray dog weaving through the crowd with something in its mouth, half a pie, by the look of it, than in the festival's promise. Closer to the city gates, carts are arriving from the countryside. You hear the creak of axles, the bleating of goats, and the clink of milk pails. Farmers unload sacks of onions and bundles of herbs, while their wives barter for ribbons or a bit of sweet spice to slip into tonight's meal. They have no illusions about the lavish tables of the wealthy. Their feast will be modest, but they will still walk into the city at sunset to see the bonfires. And yet, even here in the cramped bustle of morning, the layers of the festival are visible. A man in a wool doublet steps carefully through the mud, his boots polished, his purse tied close to his belt, someone from the middling ranks, here to do business before joining the celebration. Behind him, a laborer with bare, muddy feet carries a basket of eels, their silver bodies still twitching. The two men never meet eyes, but both are part of the same day, breathing the same mingled air of excitement, food, and wood smoke. Above it all, the church bells toll, deep, deliberate, and certain. They aren't calling for worship, not yet. This is the sound that says the day has begun, that the city belongs to no single class or calling for the next few hours. Even if you've nothing to your name but the clothes you're wearing, you feel the pull of it, the promise that tonight, you will be part of something larger. But that's later. For now, the sun is climbing, the market is swelling, and the streets are alive with 100 small preparations. Somewhere, behind the thick walls of a townhouse, a nobleman's servants are polishing silver for the banquet to come. Somewhere else, in a narrow back alley, a boy is tying sprigs of rosemary to the handles of his father's ale cart, certain it will bring more customers. And you, standing here in the middle of it all, can't help but wonder, when the day is done, and the fires are burning, whose laughter will you hear loudest? The noise changes before you even see them. It's not louder, just different. The market chatter thins, replaced by a ripple of voices that rise and fall like wind over tall grass. Heads turn toward the east gate, where the cobbles begin to tremble under the weight of hoofs. They come in a line, moving slow enough to be admired. Horses with coats brushed to a shine, their legs wrapped in bright cloth. The peponas draped low, embroidered with threads that catch the sun like thin streams of fire. Behind each rider walks a servant, shoulders bent under the weight of baskets and chests. You catch the glint of silver, dishes, perhaps, and a flash of deep orange that could only be citrus fruit. The lead rider, a man in a dark velvet surcoat, holds his reins lightly, as though the horse is moving by its own will. His hat is broad and feathered, and even the feather looks expensive, dyed the kind of blue that doesn't occur in nature without a great deal of coin. The air around him smells faintly of clove, carried from the pomander that dangles at his belt. People along the street lean forward, their eyes following each detail. A woman selling onions straightens her back and pushes her basket into the light, just in case a servant glances her way. Two boys perch on a water barrel for a better view, one nearly losing his balance when the second horse passes close enough for him to see his own reflection in its polished tack. Closer now, the train's purpose becomes clear. The carts at the rear are stacked with barrels of wine, loaves of bread wrapped in linen, and a gleaming copper spit long enough to roast a stag. The scent of beeswax rises from another crate, the fat candles within destined to burn in the city hall tonight, marking the feast's height. Not everyone greets them with open admiration. At the edge of the crowd, an old man mutters into his beard, his hand tight on the strap of his worn satchel. "They'll eat half the city before they leave," he says to no one in particular. But even he doesn't turn away. It's not every day you see wealth parade itself this close to the gutter. Beyond the gate, just inside the shadow of the wall, stand the ones who won't get closer than this. Farmers, peddlers, those who will never set foot inside the feast. They stand on tiptoe, craning their necks, following the procession with the same mixture of longing and disbelief you might give to a comet. One boy, barefoot, grins wide as a servant passes, and for a moment the man breaks rank, tossing him a small piece of sugared almond. The boy pops it into his mouth before anyone can ask for a share, his cheeks swelling with the sweetness. And just like that, the moment is over. The riders pass deeper into the city, the crowd exhales, and the street begins to remember its ordinary rhythm. But the air has changed. The scent of horses and spice lingers, along with the memory of how bright the sun looked on gold thread. And somewhere, behind shuttered windows, the tables are already being set for guests who are still taking off their riding gloves. The market doesn't wait for the nobility to pass. It bends around them and keeps moving, like a river flowing around a rock. By the time you reach the square, the air is already thick with the scent of roasting meat and fresh bread, the sweet edge of apples, and the sharp bite of onions being peeled in quick, practiced motions. Here the streets are tighter, the stones underfoot wet from where fishmongers have poured out their barrels. Stalls press in on all sides, cloth awnings sagging under the weight of morning dew. The shouts come in waves, one voice hawking fresh mackerel from the Thames, another promising spice from far-off shores. You catch sight of a basket brimming with green herbs, sage, rosemary, and a rare sprig of basil, sold for a price that would make a carpenter pause. A butcher slaps a slab of beef onto his counter with a satisfying thud. The sign above him says one roasted joint costs the same as a full day's wage for a skilled man, and yet his hands are busy, carving, wrapping, passing meat to customers whose purses must be heavier than most. Further down, a brewer rolls a barrel of ale into place, tapping it with a mallet so the foam spills over in a froth. The cost of the barrel? A week's earnings for an honest trade. The smell, yeasty, warm, slips into your nose and stays there. But not every stall smells of wealth. In the quieter corners, away from the main square, other sellers stand with small bundles of goods. A woman with a crooked back lays out a thin row of onions and leeks, the dirt still clinging to their roots. Next to her, a boy no older than 12 has a basket of mushrooms, some white, some speckled brown, gathered from the edges of the fields at dawn. They sell not to feast, but to earn enough for a single tankard of ale later, to feel the warmth of celebration if only for an hour. The crowd shifts as a gust of wind brings the smell of cinnamon from somewhere ahead, someone's baking honey cakes. You follow it past a row of stalls selling bolts of rough-spun wool, the fabric coarse against your fingers, until you find the source. A baker dusting sugar over golden rounds, their tops cracked just so. He places them in a row like treasures. The price for one? Enough to feed a family on bread and broth for the night. Still, You watch coins change hands, the cakes wrapped carefully in cloth before disappearing into waiting baskets. Somewhere to your left, a fishwife laughs so hard she has to wipe her eyes with her apron. Her table is piled high with eels and small river fish, the air around her heavy with brine. She calls to passers-by, offering, "Fresh enough to wriggle." Though you doubt she's lying, one slips from her grasp and hits the cobbles with a wet slap. Overhead, the sun catches the colored banners strung between buildings, their edges frayed but still bright. The sound of a distant bell rolls across the rooftops, slow and deliberate. It's not just noon approaching, it's the pull towards something larger, the promise of the day's heart still to come. Merchants glance toward the sound, some crossing themselves, others simply straightening their goods. The crowd seems to lean in that direction, as though the market itself knows it will soon spill into the square for the blessing. But here, for just a moment longer, life belongs to the scent of hot bread, the clink of coins, and the careful hands weighing the worth of a day's labor against the taste of something rare. The sound comes first as a low murmur, rolling over the rooftops like a distant tide. Then it gathers weight, deep and unshakable, until it fills the market entirely, the bell of St. Paul's, marking the turn toward midday. One by one, conversations falter. A fishwife pauses mid-bargain, a baker's hand stills above a tray of sugared buns. Even the haggling slows, the words softened as though they don't wish to argue over the voice of the bell. You feel the market change its shape. People who had been drifting aimlessly now tilt toward the sound, their baskets swinging at their sides, their steps quickening. Somewhere ahead, the square is pulling them in, a steady draw that no one bothers to resist. By the time you reach it, the space is already swelling with bodies, cloth merchants shoulder to shoulder with stonemasons, washerwomen pressed in beside porters in sweat-darkened tunics. At the center, the clergy stand in a small cleared ring, their robes catching the light like ripples of cream and gold. The incense they burn clings to the air, softening the sharper smells of horse and ale. A voice rises above the crowd, steady and practiced. The bishop's words carry easily, blessing the day, the city, and the feast to come. Hands cross themselves, heads bow. Even those who muttered about church tithes yesterday are quiet now, if only for the length of the prayer. The tone is solemn, but under it runs the current of expectation, the unspoken knowledge that once the final amen is said, the day will open into music, food, and fire. Near the back of the crowd, a boy on his father's shoulders stares not at the bishop but at the bright banners hung from the guildhalls. A gust catches them, and for a moment they look like sails, straining towards something unseen. And in another part of the city, far from the square's crush, the port smells different. Here, where the Thames widens and the gulls wheel low, fishermen have their own way of marking the day. The blessing may be heard faintly over the water, but their altar is the iron pot simmering on the shore. Fresh-caught mackerel bubble in a broth thick with herbs, the steam curling into the salt air. They eat from wooden bowls, perched on overturned crates, sharing bread that's already spotted with flour from the morning's baking. No silver chalices, no incense, just the slow, companionable rhythm of spoons on wood and the hiss of the tide against the pilings. Back in the square, the bishop's voice falls silent. The bell tolls once more, a single, rounded note that lingers long enough for people to exchange glances, shift their feet, and, like water released from a dam, spill outward. The blessing is done. The feast can begin to show its teeth. The first smell to reach you is meat, rich, spiced, and smoky, drifting down the narrow lanes like a promise. You follow it as others do, drawn toward the tall timbered hall where the city fathers host their honored guests. The doors stand open, the heat spilling out into the street, and for a moment you see nothing but the glow of the hearth and the shimmer of candlelight on metal. Inside, the tables run the length of the hall, boards so heavy they could outlast the stone walls. At the head, a swan sits poised as though it might lift its head and glide away, its feathers lacquered with a glaze that catches the firelight. Beside it, platters of venison, trenchers piled with pies fattened by cinnamon and cloves. The scents fight for your attention, and for once, no one minds losing that battle. The guests wear their best, sleeves stiff with embroidery, rings flashing as they reach for goblets. Their laughter comes easily, loosened by the first round of wine. Here, in this hall, the city shows its wealth not just in gold but in the scale of its generosity, though generosity, of course, has a guest list. Step outside, and the tone shifts. On the green just beyond the hall's shadow, townsfolk spread their own feasts on cloths laid over the grass. Meat pies wrapped in thick, peppery crusts, the kind you can hold in one hand while keeping the other free for a mug of ale. Children bite into them too soon, burning their tongues but refusing to let go. The air here is no less alive, shouts, songs, the thud of a keg being tapped, but it carries none of the polished restraint of the banquet hall. The two worlds are close enough that their sounds mingle. A lute strikes up inside just as a fiddler tunes on the green. The swan's glaze cracks under the carver's knife at the same moment a meat pie splits to reveal its steam. For a heartbeat, you could almost believe the celebration belongs to everyone equally. But then a servant closes the hall door against the night air, and the warm light narrows to a seam. Outside, the grass smells of spilled ale, and a fresh pie costs what a cobbler earns in half a day. Still, no one complains. Not here, not tonight. There is music ahead, and fire yet to be lit. You follow the current of voices and laughter away from the hall, down a street now bright with torchlight. The air changes here, less of roasted meat, more of pitch and smoke, the tang of cheap ale spilled on cobblestones. Ahead, a ring of people has formed, and at its center, a juggler in a red tunic tosses 3 knives high enough to catch the firelight before they spin back toward his hands. A minstrel stands to the side, plucking at a lute so worn the wood is shiny where fingers have worked it for years. His song carries a story, something about a fisherman, a jealous wife, and an eel that ruined a wedding feast. The crowd roars at the punchline, even those who missed half the words. Beside him, a pair of boys no older than 12 weave between the onlookers with painted wooden swords, staging a mock duel. Their crowns are scraps of fabric stitched with buttons, their laughter loud enough to rival the applause. When a passerby drops a coin into a chipped mug at their feet, they pause just long enough to bow before clashing again. If you glance back toward the hall, you can still see the glow in the high windows and catch the faint pulse of music inside. But here, the performance is rawer, cheerful chaos rather than orchestrated show. A juggled knife slips, clattering harmlessly to the ground, and the juggler turns the mistake into a bow so deep it earns louder cheers than his perfect throws. In the shadow of a side alley, away from the torchlight, another stage plays out. A girl balances on a single barrel, her arms wide for balance, reciting lines from a saint's legend in a voice so clear it cuts through the noise. She stumbles once, twice, but never falls, and when she leaps down, a man in the crowd claps her on the back like she's just bested a tournament night. The city feels tighter here, like all its walls have leaned in to watch. You can almost forget the swan under gold in the hall, or the velvet sleeves raised in careful applause. Here, coins are tossed for a laugh, not for status. And somewhere just ahead, the air flickers warmer, as though the night is preparing to draw every soul toward the same blaze. The pull begins as a murmur, a low hum of voices drifting through the narrow lanes, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter. You follow it until the buildings give way to the open square, and there it is, the heart of the festival. In the center, a tower of wood rises high as 2 men, stacked with the care of a siege engine. It smells of pine and resin, and already the kindling at its base trembles with the touch of flame. Sparks leap upward like startled fireflies, chased by cheers. People press in from all directions, merchants in fine cloaks, apprentices still smelling of forged smoke, farmers with dirt under their nails. For once, the lines between them blur. Here, no one guards the high table or counts the silver in your goblet. The fire's light is for everyone, and its heat is as generous to the barefoot boy in the crowd's edge as to the noble woman wrapped in fox fur. The first rush of flames surges upward, and the whole square tilts its head back in unison, as if the fire has drawn their gaze on strings. Shadows shiver on the walls, and faces turn gold in the glow. Someone begins a song, an old midsummer tune with verses no one quite remembers, and within moments the chorus swells with voices from every corner of the square. Not far off, behind a line of guards, a smaller fire crackles in the courtyard of the Lord's residence. It burns slower, fed with logs of applewood and cedar, releasing a sweeter, perfumed smoke. Around it, a ring of chairs has been set for the Lord's guests, their wine poured before the kindling even caught. Here, the laughter is polite, the warmth measured. Back in the square, the main fire roars higher. Children dart close enough to feel the lick of heat before their mothers snatch them back. Men lift their mugs in toasts that vanish into the night air. The air smells of smoke and roasting chestnuts from a nearby stall, the sweetness mixing with the dry tang of ash. The flames throw sparks high enough to touch the first stars, and for a moment, it feels as if the night has only just begun, as though every path in the city will keep leading back here, to this roaring heart. But not all paths stay in the open. Some slip into shadow, where the fire's reach fades, and other kinds of heat, sharper, more dangerous, take hold. Slip away from the bonfire, and the air changes. The heat on your skin fades, replaced by the closeness of low-beamed rooms and the smell of yeast and wood smoke. The first tavern you pass has its shutters thrown open, spilling music and the clink of mugs into the lane. Inside, the light is amber and thick, wrapping around the crowd like a worn cloak. At one table, two sailors lean in over their ale, voices rising with every retelling of a sea story that probably began as truth and will end as legend. Their sleeves are damp from spilled drink, and one has a grin wide enough to show the gap where a tooth once was. In the corner, an apprentice tanner sings a verse too loud for his own voice, earning a round of laughter from strangers who raise their mugs in his direction. Not every sound is friendly. Near the bar, a man's shoulder bumps another's, and the music hiccups as voices sharpen. Ale sloshes, a chair scrapes the floor, and for a breath it feels like fists will fly. But the innkeeper, a woman with forearms like tree branches, steps in with a wooden ladle, the kind you suspect has been used for more than soup. The moment wilts, replaced by muttered insults, and another round ordered to save face. Upstairs, above the swell of noise, the world is different. In a narrow room lit by a single candle, 3 men sit at a small table, their cups made of glazed ceramic instead of wood. The ale here is poured slowly, without froth, and sipped as if each mouthful needs considering. Their talk isn't about the bonfire or the market stalls. It's about land, rents, and which cousin married into which family. The air smells less of sweat and more of beeswax and expensive wool. Outside, you pass another doorway where the celebration has tipped past laughter into something looser. A fiddler plays without pause, even as a couple stumbles into his bow arm. In the shadows just beyond, someone is being sick against the wall, the steam of it curling in the night air before fading away. The noise swells and thins as you move on, like waves meeting the shore. And then you hear it. The distant call of merchants who haven't shut their stalls, the faint hiss of torches, the smell of sugar warming in a pan. The festival hasn't settled yet, it's only shifted shape. What waits ahead is brighter, sharper, and sweet enough to pull you in. The lane spills you into light. Torches burn high on iron poles, their flames bending in the summer breeze and painting the cobblestones gold. The air here is thick with smells, roasted nuts turning in a copper pan, honey cakes crisping on a griddle, spiced wine steaming in clay jugs. The heat of it hits your face before you've taken 3 steps. Vendors call from behind their stalls, each voice trying to outsing the next. A boy barely tall enough to see over his table shouts about sugared almonds, rattling the tin scoop like a drum. A woman with a scarf the color of embers leans forward, offering you a strip of fried dough dusted in cinnamon. The sugar sticks to your fingers instantly, melting into warmth that tastes of both comfort and indulgence. The crowd here isn't polite like the Lord's Hall or careful like the alehouse above the tavern. It's a crush of elbows and laughter, of half-finished songs and sudden greetings. A cooper in a leather apron has one arm around his wife and the other cradling a jug of hot wine. A pair of seamstresses weave through the bodies like fish in a tide, clutching their corncakes so tightly they leave imprints in the crust. Not every meal comes wrapped in spice and sweetness. In the darker corners of the square, where the torchlight doesn't reach, you see another kind of feast. A knot of ragged figures crouches around the clay brazier, heating scraps of yesterday's bread until the edges crisp. Someone pulls a strip of meat from a pocket, too small to name, and lays it on the grate, turning it with a stick until the fat sizzles. Their laughter is quieter, but no less real, and the smell of charring bread drifts into the same summer air as the sugared almonds. You pass a cart piled with wheels of cheese, another with barrels of ale on their sides, spigots dripping into mugs. Children dart between the legs of strangers, chasing each other with sticks wrapped in ribbons, their shouts blending with the bark of a mongrel nosing after crumbs. And above it all, there's the sound of coins, the chink of copper into wooden bowls, the slide of silver into waiting hands. This is the heartbeat of the festival now, pulsing under the glow of the torches. But beyond the market stalls and the torches' reach, the city is already beginning to quiet. Somewhere past the square, in the dark behind stone walls, the festival is ending one way for some, and not at all for others. That's where your feet are carrying you next. Beyond the market's glow, the streets begin to thin. The voices fade into a low murmur, the kind that travels through stone like the tide beneath ice. A torch guttering on a wall throws shadows long enough to step over. The smell of spice and smoke lingers in the air, but it's already losing its warmth. You follow the last trickle of festival-goers along the cobbles, their steps uneven from wine and weariness. A man in a crooked hat hums to himself, swinging an empty jug like a bell clapper. A woman carries her shoes in one hand, skirts lifted to keep them out of the street's damp, eyes half closed as if dreaming of her bed. In the castle's great hall, though, the night is far from done. Candles burn in their sconces, their wax pooling in wide silver dishes. At the head table, the lord leans back in his chair, a half-empty goblet of wine in hand, smiling at something only he seems to understand. Musicians still play, softer now, a harp and a viol weaving notes that sound like the embers of a song rather than its blaze. Platters still sit within reach, venison glazed in honey, pears poached in spiced wine, bread so fresh it steams when torn. The air is thick with satisfaction, with the comfortable heaviness of having everything and no need to rise for it. Beyond the castle gates, a very different ending unfolds. In a low-roofed cottage on the edge of the city, a family gathers around a small table. The fire in the hearth is almost out, and the single candle throws more shadow than light. On the table is a clay bowl of bean stew, thick but modest, with a single crust of bread to pass around. The father cuts it into even pieces, his hands steady despite the hunger in the room. They eat in silence at first, then softly begin to speak of the day, of the music heard faintly from the square, of the smell of roasting meat that reached even their street. Outside, the festival's last bonfire is little more than a glow on the horizon, The smoke trails upward, disappearing into the same summer night that blankets both the golden-lit hall and the dim cottage. The city sleeps, divided by walls, but held for a moment under the same quiet sky.